Welcome to the last of the Col-Hi Wildcats 1982 podcast, brought to you by Dietzel Man Productions.
And
you go to college and you're on this all-star team. And so I would tell myself that really don't listen to that voice inside your head that tells you you're not good enough. And probably the other thing I would tell myself is get more sleep.
not everyone's gonna like you, but try to make them want to. Still working on that one.
People say, oh, I'm not going to have kids yet because it's not the right time, or I'm not going to get married yet because it's not the right time. Well, if you keep moving the goalposts in life, it's never going to be the right time. So enjoy your life.
Do what you love for a living. Figure out a way to make that work. Don't do something because it's what you're supposed to do or because it's going to be the most fun. You do something that makes you happy.
Take going to Landers for lunch, sitting around Jeff Blair's Mustang 2 and listening to his tape of Creek Road Walk.
Hey, this is Scott Townsend. Welcome back to the last of the Col-Hi Wildcats 1982 podcast. And today in this episode, you'll get to hear from one of the sweetest ladies I know, Mrs. Sue Reynolds. Mrs. Reynolds was kind enough to spend some time with me and talk about what it was like to be a home ec teacher in College High back in 1982 and before. Mrs. Reynolds talks about how she got into teaching, how she helped students feel valued. She answers questions sent in by you on Facebook, and she offers up some advice for all of us for the next 30, 40 years. If you like this podcast, you can be a member of the last of the Col-Hi Wildcats 1982 podcast by going to patreon.com/Wildcats1982 and choose the membership level that's right for you. And as always, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And now, my conversation with the wonderful Mrs. Sue Reynolds. Mrs. Reynolds, how you doing?
Doing great.
So there's been a lot of students who I've interviewed so far, and one of the questions I always ask is, what teacher influenced you, or who did you like as a teacher? And your name pops up probably more than anybody else. No, definitely more than anybody else. And so when Donnie sent me a picture of you and him the other day and said, hey, you need to interview Mrs. Reynolds, I appreciate you taking the time to visit with us.
Thank you. Well, I ran into Donnie at the basketball game. We still love to go to the basketball game. So all of these years, even after teaching, my husband and I continue to go to almost all the home basketball games. And that's where I oftentimes see Donnie. Donnie also lived down the street from us several years ago on a previous street. And it was really nice to have that connection with him and his family at that time.
So let me ask you, going back 39 years, one of the originating questions maybe is, how did you get into teaching? What got you into the teaching profession?
Okay. I grew up in a small rural community, and you have to realize that was back in the early 60s. And for women, we kind of thought of our choices after graduation was, well, you could go to college because there was a junior college about 5 miles from us. We could become a nurse or a teacher, cosmetology, and that was of interest to me. But I really wanted to go to college. So I had wonderful teachers that just poured their life into us students and gave us a lot of attention extra time. I could see their lifestyle. It just meant a lot to me to see the influence that they had not only on me, but on other students. And I thought, that is something that I would like to do, to be able to influence the young people and to be a part of that. I love school. I loved all the activities. I participated in everything that came about. And so it was just seemed like the natural thing for me to do. So I just enrolled in college at Wilburton, went 2 years, and then went on to OSU. And that's just kind of how I got started.
So you went to OSU?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. So did I. So
That's okay. Let me tell you something interesting. In high school, our school colors were black and gold. Okay. Then when I went to junior college, it was gold and kind of a royal blue. Then when I went to OSU, of course, we know it's black and orange. And when I graduated from there, I went to Copan to teach for 5 years, and their colors were black and gold.
well, I'll be.
Then I came to Col-Hi, and we all know what those colors were, black and gold. I said, it just seemed like it fit.
So, if I ask a question and I'm prying, just say I don't want to answer that. But what year did you start at College High?
1970. I taught 5 years previous, and then came there in 1970. And then I told the class of 98 that I was going to finally graduate with them. That meant I was retiring. But then I went right back into substituting. And
okay.
I've substituted now for 20 years. So I spent 55 years in the classroom.
Wow.
This is the first year that I haven't been substituting. I decided at my age, I should just give it up and stay home and do other things. And that's what I'm doing.
You can do whatever you want now. You've earned it.
Right.
There's several students that have mentioned, like I said earlier, that you were one of their favorites, and they're very enthusiastic when they say that. Why do you think that is? Why do you think after 39 years, when asked who was your favorite teacher, they say you?
I really think, Scott, that goes back to the curriculum. The family living curriculum, or the home economics, covered many, many areas of study. And I just feel like that it was the subjects that we were teaching, and I always kind of related it to living in Oklahoma. If you didn't like what we were studying right now, just bear with it. In a few weeks, we'd be on to something else. It's like the weather, it would change.
Yeah.
And so we just covered so many life skills, preparing them to leave home, to be able to function on their own. I think we tried to make the classes very interesting. Sue Smith was another one of their favorite teachers that I know that a lot of the students have referred to her.
Right.
And sometimes it would be a toss up to, were they going to get Miss Smith or were they going to get Miss Reynolds? But we worked very closely together to develop the program that would meet the needs of young people, but do it in an interesting way that they could interact with other students frequently. I mean, a lot of our activities, they interacted, together in the classroom. Another thing was that we had field trips and guest speakers. I'll forever be grateful to the people in Bartlesville that embraced our program, would allow hundreds of students to come through their business on a day's basis, or they would come and speak to roughly 200 students 5 times during the day. because we would put the classes together when the speaker came. So one speaker could take care of two classes at the same time. But I think a lot of it was the course, the camaraderie within the classroom, interacting with each other. But as a teacher myself, because even though we were teaching the same thing, and Sue and I worked together to plan the lessons, and then we'd get together after school. Well, you know, how far did you get, and how did, you know, what was the response, and so forth. They were getting the same basic information, but just through different teachers. But my goal was to create an atmosphere in my classroom where every student felt welcome, they felt valued, and that they felt that I was being a fair teacher, you know, trying to treat everybody as equally as I could. And so that probably had something to do with it.
So how did you go? How did you go about doing that? How did you go about doing that? What does a teacher? What would you do to help make a student feel valued or heard or feel like a part of the class?
I tried to get the students' name and face together as quickly as possible. That was my goal the first week of school. And how I accomplished that was with name tags. I made little name cards and I seated them alphabetically. And I said, this won't last forever, but until I get to know you, name and face,
right,
let's do this together. And then I tried to incorporate every student in what was happening. I tried to be aware of the students that were more shy, that needed some encouragement. I tried to observe their actions, reactions, to see if I could pick up on things that might be bothering them. And if so, I tried privately to see if there was something that I could do for them. I just tried to develop a relationship with every student. And I know there were students that went through and said, well, I don't think she ever knew me that well. And others thought, I wish she didn't know me so well. But I loved teaching. I loved the students. And I always wanted that to come forth, that they were important to me and a big part of my life.
Isn't it funny that you started off with getting to know their name and their face? That's to me, that's I totally agree. And I just wonder why that's so important to us.
Well, don't we still appreciate people that remember your name, even though our faces change? And that's something I would say to any of the students that's listening, former students. I really appreciate if you see me out somewhere that you stop me and you say, I think you're Mrs. Reynolds, or I think I recognize you, and tell me who you are. I love to reconnect with students that I haven't seen for years, but I can't always remember the name. I may recognize the face. Sometimes we can't recognize each other's faces, but I always like to know and keep up with former students.
You had the hardest part of the job. Everybody can remember you, but you had to remember hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students.
Yes.
Wow.
When I retired in '98, I had over 3,000 students, because all the years of my teaching, I would average 100 or more students. That's a lot of students to remember. And then now for the next 20 years, I had all those students that I substituted from class to class. So some of them I, could remember, and names and faces, and got it together. So I kept returning to the same classroom, where they'd be in a different class. But it's just a lot of memory. And you guys are just in your late 50s, and I'm in my late 70s. So add 30 more years, to the brain, and it just doesn't function as well.
What was a typical day at school like for you and
Okay,
Mrs. Smith?
I would usually show up 30 to 45 minutes before class time. And of course, you check in the office so they know you're there. And then get the mail, see what's going on, take care of things that needed something to take care of then. And then get to the classroom so I would be there as the early birds came, because oftentimes your good visiting times were before school, lunchtime, after school, at the student's opportunity. So I wanted to be available if a student wanted to come in.
Yeah.
And with our labs, there was so much to set up. I wanted to get that done in the afternoon. So usually I would teach 3 hours in the morning and then have that 30 to 40 minute lunch time. And that covered not only eating lunch, going to the restroom, putting on lipstick again, that was important, and being ready for the afternoon classes. And then after the classes, if there was a planning period then or sometime during the day, it was again getting prepared for the next day, meeting with other teachers, especially with Sue, or whomever my teaching partner would be at the time. And I always wanted to set everything up for the next day before I left in the afternoon. I didn't want to feel rushed the next morning and trying to put things together, because a lot of ours was getting things out, especially in the foods unit, sometimes in the sewing unit, depending on what we were doing. There was setting up things in the classroom. And so I just wanted to be prepared. Oftentimes there were a lot of meetings after school, especially the 9 years that I was department chair, and would travel to other buildings and have meetings at various times. So a lot of time was spent with meetings after school. When I would arrive home, prepare dinner. Back in those days, we didn't run by and pick up takeout food. Mom prepared dinner. And so that was something. And then if there was a school activity going on, I wanted to be there. So we would go back in the evening to school activities. Often referred to myself as a bag lady when I was teaching, because it seemed like I was always taking home a bag, a case or something of things to be working on at home.
Yeah.
Papers to grade, lessons, planning, and contacts being made. But one of the things that in the day's activity is scheduling those field trips. That's one of the things that students love. We got on the bus and went someplace on a field trip. Or we had a guest speaker coming in, and coordinating all of that would take time in the day. But it was very valuable to the students.
Now, I didn't have home economics. So can you give me an idea of what was studied during that class?
Sure. I would often refer to it, we studied most things A through Z. Okay, but to break it down into some of the units of study. Years ago, people thought of home economics as cooking and sewing. We continue to include those throughout all the years that I taught, but we branched out into many other areas. We had a unit of study on housing. You know, what would you look for when you get out and you need to rent a place? What you would look for, what you need to know if you were going to look at buying a place. What about some of the furnishings and various things? So the housing unit, child development, pregnancy, through the pregnancy, childbirth, delivery, care of newborns, and then child development. Some of the stages that you could expect, like from the toddler years, the 3 through 5s, and that sort of thing.
Right.
So, and marriage and family relationships. So we got into a lot on, you know, from dating to marriage. And one of the big things was when the guest speakers would come in and set up for a wedding reception, bring wedding dresses and a tux, and kids would get to put them on, and they'd go through the process, you know, And then when Dorothy Welch would come and have the wedding cake that she would bring and talk about receptions and all of that part of the wedding. And then the kids, of course, got to have punch and cake.
Right.
So that was a big deal. So any of that on relationships, marriage, and so forth. Consumer education, so much dealing with the use of money. You don't just earn it, but how do you learn to budget the money? So they did a lot of budgeting exercises, income tax. They'd go through a process of working out budgets according to a career that they had chosen. And we tried to help them to choose realistic salaries. You know, they'd have to look up the salary range. But they, of course, wanted this huge salary, and we'd kind of remind them that you have to work up to that. But the budgeting, they had to do a budget when they were in the foods unit. So much for each kitchen for their so many weeks of cooking. And they had to keep a record of everything they spent.
I should have taken home. I should have taken this class. I can really see where I missed out on a lot.
Yeah, well, that's true. We covered a lot of area in what we taught. We were preparing students, you know, to go out and be successful.
So here's one question for from one of the students on Facebook, Amy Wallen. She said, let's see. I told you. Amy said her complexion is so nice. What moisturizer does she use to not age?
You know, really, I think it's more the genes, my background, my inheritance, my longevity was in our family, and my mom always looked 10 to 15 years younger than she was.
No, okay, good.
I don't think it's what I used on my face. I think it's what I put into my heart and my soul that comes forth. I've been truly blessed with good health. I'm very grateful that I have had good health, but it just comes from within. But for Amy, I will tell her that I've used just various moisturizers and makeups. And most of the time it was what was on sale. But from a lady that had wonderful complexion a few years ago, I asked her, what do you use? And she said, well, she uses coconut moisturizer. And she bought it at Sam's. So I went to Sam's and bought coconut moisturizer. And then later I found it in our store here, Ollie's. Now, they don't always have the same
Aldi's.
So I don't know if she could find it here now. But that's what I use at the present time. So
well, there you go.
There you go, Amy.
She's in San Diego, I believe, right now. She's an author. And yeah, so she's, you know, we've had her on the show before.
Good.
What are some of your favorite memories from the last year at College High? Well, thinking back on that last year, I don't think we as students realize, I mean, we did realize that was a big thing, but I think as we get older, we appreciate that the ending of an era, so to speak. What's your favorite memories from that year, maybe?
As again, I said, trying to think back exactly what happened at that particular year. My memory goes back to everything was special and unique because we all realized that was the last year that we would be Col-Hi Wildcats. Because we knew by the end of the year that we were going to be Bruins, that we would no longer have the black and gold, that we would have blues and white. And I just feel like everything that year had an importance that meant something special because it was going to be the last time that it would be considered that. And of course, my love for basketball, I remember, you know, Donnie Moreland being one of the stars for the basketball. And so all of the activities, I think, were just special because of knowing it was going to change.
Right. Yeah, I think we all kind of felt that way a little bit. And so here's another question for you. This is from, let's see, Glenn Goodrich. He says, Mrs. Reynolds provided me with a ceramic pie pan when I first married, as well as an autographed cookbook. I believe I still have both. And then Amy says, so ask her if she has any pie advice, because Amy's yeah, she's a big pie maker, I guess. And so they were talking about this.
Make that, or Goodrich. Make that filling from scratch. It's going to taste better. And on the crust, don't overwork it. Overworking it makes it too tough. You want to keep it light and fluffy and use more shortening, about a third of the shortening that you use with flour to a half, that combo.
So I make an apple pie, and I use the pre-made rolled up the pie,
Yes,
yes. And it tastes pretty good. So what you're saying is don't use that, make it from scratch. And so how do you make it from scratch? I have no idea.
Oh, okay. Well, there's recipes, but it contains flour and shortening, and salt. You work those together with a pastry blender or 2 knives, pastry blender, and then you begin to add cold water. I put ice in the water and get it real cold, then pour out from that the amount of cold water I need, and you work that in gradually, with a big fork or something where you don't mash it and smash it. You want to keep everything light and fluffy, and only enough till you can get it to roll it together in a ball. Chill it, and then put it out on your pastry cloth. It's been floured, no flour on it. So there's recipes in those books how to do those pies.
Go get get your recipe book. So yeah, I'm gonna try that next time instead of using the pre-made pie crust thing. I think I'll try that.
Glenn is different from a lot of the students that I had. Usually got invitations to a lot of their weddings, and I was always thrilled. But I realized that with a family of my own, limited budget, that I couldn't afford to go and buy really nice wedding gifts. So I thought, what can I do that would mean something to the students that wouldn't be real costly? So many of my students received a little bag that I made from a heavy neutral fabric. And sometimes I'd monogram something on it and sometimes not. But then in that bag would be a dozen or more cookie cutters. And a recipe for sugar cookies. And that way I could give a personal gift that I had made, spent time putting together without spending a lot of money. And even today, I'll have students tell me, I still have that cookie bag and those cookie cutters.
Well, I'll be.
If
That's
you got
so
a
awesome.
cookbook and a pie pan, well, that was a little different.
So there you go, Glenn. You better consider yourself special. Chris Hayes. You remember Chris Hayes, the swimmer? She said, echoing Amy's question, maybe I should have asked this 20 years ago. I want to know what she thought about teaching serious life skills to high school seniors for all those years, and how did they come up with the curriculum?
How did it come up with what?
The curriculum. How did you come up with the curriculum?
Oh, okay. Sue Smith started that curriculum. She gets the credit for starting that. And when she started teaching, she saw a need, for life skills. and she started. Well, and then I came on board, and we began to work and develop more and more. Then the State Department of Vocational Home Economics asked me to be on their state curriculum development for family living. So I took what Sue and I had developed and then met with committees, and we continued to develop the extensive curriculum. And it was used for years and years. And now, as many people know, that home economics has kind of phased out in a lot of the schools, including Bartlesville.
So I was going to ask you about that. What do you think about that?
What do I think about that? It breaks my heart. I mean, we taught skills that young people are not getting elsewhere. And sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, they can go buy all the food they need at the delis and the restaurants, and you can take your clothes to the cleaners, and I mean, you know, just things like that, and say we can get by without. But they're missing a lot. A lot of young people do not know how to budget. You know, they spend what they have and they don't worry about the next. Many students have gotten some of that elsewhere. So I think it's a loss to the young people that they've done away with that curriculum. I will say that in Bartlesville, what basically replaced our department was the STEM program. And I have substituted in the STEM many times. I think it's a wonderful program. I think it's needed. I think it's beneficial. But, you know, it kind of took the place of home economics and family living. And, you know, home economics changed from that to the wording as family and consumer sciences, because that was more of what we taught. Like you say, you didn't realize all the things that we taught, but that better fit the curriculum type. But
you know, it's interesting. I think back over the last 39 years, the need to sew on a button. You would think that would never come into play, but I can't tell you how many times I've either been on a business trip or here at the house or, you know, something, and you got to put a button on, and I didn't know how to sew the button on, you know, something as simple as that. So I just kind of find that interesting. Actually, you don't think it's a big deal, but it's a big deal when you don't know it and need it.
Yeah. And a lot of students had no idea about how to sort laundry.
I didn't know there was a.
They just put everything in the washer at one time. Well, that's not the best way to do it. So he taught that, and how to iron. You know, again, today, not very many people do a lot of ironing, but I always thought it was important that if I was going to send my husband out, he should have a shirt that was ironed, you know.
That's why I guess my wife won't let me do the wash, because everything just goes in.
But everybody needs to know how to do it.
Yeah. Here's another question.
Okay.
Did you realize at the time what a huge impact you would have on all of us?
I don't know that I really realized. I wanted to have a very positive impact on the young people. But I don't know that I fully realized how much impact it's had until I hear students, former students, tell me that what some of the things that they learned and how beneficial it's been to them in their adult lives. And so that's been encouraging to know that they did learn some things and they've put it into practice. Yeah.
They were listening. Yeah.
Yes.
And then Chris Hayes winds up with, she says, please tell her how many of us mentioned her as a favorite teacher. So I'm passing that along from.
Would you
Chris.
repeat that, Scott?
Yeah, Chris Hayes finished up her question with, and please tell her how many of us mentioned her as a favorite teacher.
Oh, and I thank every one of you that liked me and put up with me and have remembered me. And like I said, I'm just thrilled to have this time to share some of those stories and experiences. And please get in touch with me if you can. Scott has my email and phone number. So I give him permission to give it out. I don't want to just broadcast it, but I'd love to hear from any and all of you.
All right. One last, I guess this is the last one. She gave us great, Amy said this, she gave us great advice at 18. What can she give us for the future? You gave everyone great advice back in 1982. 39 years later, what can you tell us? What advice would you give us now?
To live a clean life. Happiness comes from within, and that comes through your relationship with God. So have a clean life, exercise, eat healthy, and do the things that you enjoy doing. In other words, there's a book titled Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And many of the things that we dwell on and spend our time on is small, insignificant things that oftentimes does not even happen. So live in the moment and plan far enough in the future that you're making wise decisions, but enjoy life. Enjoy your families, enjoy your friends. You know, we said goodbye to a good friend this morning.
John Burkett.
Yes. So we never know when that time will come. Be prepared and enjoy your family and your friends.
Well, that's a great note to end on. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for visiting with us. I know everyone's going to enjoy this, and you'll probably be hearing from a lot of them here. I hope. I'll have your email and phone number handy in case anybody wants that. Well, Mrs. Reynolds, anything you'd like to tell the last of the Col-Hi Wildcats before we sign off?
Just as I said, enjoy day by day, and to know that I love you, but always love you. You had a very special part of my life. My life was centered around my career. I had a wonderful family, a wonderful husband that supported me. It enabled me to give a great deal of myself to my students. And I'll just love each of you forever. Let me know when you see me who you are. Okay.
All right. Well, so hang on just a second. Don't hang up yet. But so for Mrs. Sue Reynolds, this is Scott Townsend. Thanks for listening, watching to the last of the Col-Hi Wildcats 1982 podcast. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you later.
The last of the Col-Hi Wildcats 1982 podcast is a Deep Soul Man production. Visit the Last of the Col-Hi Wildcats 1982 YouTube channel, listen on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.
This podcast is made possible by our Patreon members, Butch Bolin, Ben Townsend, Mark Thompson, Sandra Yeager, and Christy Brooks. And by the generous donations made via the GoFundMe campaign.